Welcome to the Green Lectionary Podcast, a production of Creation Justice Ministries. The Green Lectionary is a conversation on Scripture through the lens of creation justice. My name is Derek Weston, and today we will be looking at a text for the fourth Sunday in Lent. For this episode, I'm joined by Ellen Davis, Professor of Bible and Practical Theology at Duke Divinity School, Jerusha Neal, Professor of Homiletics at Duke Divinity School, and Mark Biddle, Dean of Faculty at Sophia Seminary. Before we begin our episode, a quick plug for one of Creation Justice Ministry's other programs, Blue Theology. Blue Theology is a place where current science and marine biology meets a theology of creation justice. Each summer, we host youth groups to engage in experiential learning, service projects, and contemplative practice with God's marine creation. We have outposts in North Carolina, Newport Beach, California, and Texas City, Texas, and registration is open now. To learn more, go to www.bluetheology.com. And our text for today, for the fourth Sunday in Lent, is Numbers 21, verses 4-9. From Mount Hor they set out by the way to the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. But the people became impatient on the way. The people spoke against God and against Moses. "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent poisonous serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord to take away the serpents from us." So Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord said to Moses, "Make a poisonous serpent and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten shall look at it and live." So Moses made a serpent of bronze and put it upon a pole. Whenever a serpent bit someone, that person would look at the serpent of bronze and live. And so I ask, where is creation in this passage?
It's in the snakes, Derek. It's in the snakes. I am, yeah. This is a hard passage, but here we go. Here we go.
Here we go.
Right. So this question about the mystery of causality, like, rears its head in this passage. But one of the things that I think this plague of snakes, seraphs, speaks to me of is this ambivalence of natural disaster. When I think about climate and I think about creation, and I think about the ways in which sometimes the very things brought about by our sin are the things that open our eyes to a new way of being in the world. And so, again, I would say creation is, in some ways, this reckoning in the passage through the snake, with a deep misunderstanding of what it means to be part of this created order. I'll start there. There's a lot more to say, but let's start there.
And maybe I'd start by saying that, in a sense, creation is first to be observed by its absence in the people's perception. If we speak of acts of God, the first thing that we hear is that Moses made them leave Egypt, and that there's no bread and there's water, and the food is despicable. It's the word they use.
There's no food and it's terrible.
They sound like teenagers. So, serpent is a pretty loaded translation. It's not a bad one, but these are snakes.
Mm-hmm.
It's the garden variety. From one perspective, it is the word for a garden variety snake, which is exactly what God, I guess, will tell them in Deuteronomy that they're going to encounter in the great and terrible wilderness. It goes with the territory, you might say. Burning snakes. So it's an image with lots and lots of levels to it, ranging from ancient Near East Egyptian mythology to Genesis to the heavenly court in Isaiah to Deuteronomy. And they are natural elements and they are supernatural elements.
I mean, it draws to mind, at Creation Justice Ministries, so much of our work is pointing people to, like, just even if you go on our website, you'll see so many beautiful vistas. You'll see the shoreline and you'll see the forests and you'll see all sorts of just grand visions of creation. And creation also includes snakes.
Yeah.
and I think that this is, Mark, you said it very simply, but like creation includes snakes. Creation includes a whole lot of things that also are deserving of our protection.
Yeah, that observation in Jerusha is about causality. Takes me immediately to the God's responses to Job. The wisdom. I got a conversation with my daughter recently, who was puzzling over, and what I think I said something about something to the effect that some natural catastrophe that I wouldn't describe it as a tragedy because tragedy has ethical components, and there's nothing ethical about or unethical about a tornado or a hurricane. And I think we think about when we think about God's good creation, we do tend to think about the fluffy kittens and not the mighty tigers. I'm a big fan of William Blake, and in his paired Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience, he pairs Little Lamb Who Made Thee with Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, and I just there's God says in Job, have you considered Behemoth and Leviathan? I made them too. I didn't just make the little lambs.
So I think part of what that reveals to me in this story is this sort of reorientation that sometimes the things that may kill you can also give life. I mean, this sort of, there's this breaking of this binary that we can sort of choose the parts of this web that we're connected to and reject the other. I mean, there's a kind of creation is teaching something deep here about, well, ultimately, if Jesus's words are listened to in John, something even deep about God, that there is something that fearful about this God and yet redeeming about this God, and you don't get the one without the other. I mean, there's some deep truth there that I think creation is bringing to the surface. I'm curious, Ellen, maybe you can speak to this briefly. I'm interested in this word impatient. The people were impatient.
Probably the closest you could get in English is short-tempered. Their being, their nefesh was short, is what it says. And so, this is their seventh rebellion against God in the wilderness. And as you know, 7 is a number of completion. So the people have had it, and God's had it too. And the last time, maybe we're thinking about the fact that the last time God sent out snakes was in Pharaoh's court. When Moses throws down it's a different word, um, but it's a similar phenomenon, and ultimately, so they're a symbol of God's power,
Mm.
um, and power to defeat opposition, as they are in Pharaoh's court and as they are here.
Mm-hmm.
Whether the opposition comes from Pharaoh or whether it comes from the people that God has brought out of Egypt.
So that brings us to our next question. Where's God calling? How's God calling us to interact with creation in this passage? And I feel like that gets a whole lot messier.
Well, I mean, you could start with being appreciative of what you have.
Mhm.
That wouldn't be bad. Uh, this no good food, whatever. Yeah. Um,
Maybe we could speak a little bit about seeing accurately, seeing and
Mm.
speaking accurately,
Yeah.
because the people don't speak accurately.
mm-hmm.
Um, God, why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in this wilderness?
Die. Yeah.
No food, no water. And okay, there's food, but it's disgusting.
Yeah.
And so, that is to say the least a tendentious representation of the facts. And then interestingly, when after they've been bitten by these fiery creatures, which in Deuteronomy probably means that their bite burns, their venom burns.
Mm-hmm.
But after one has been bitten, then you have to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And in the seeing comes some kind of healing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what struck me too, Ellen, that, the response to the prayer is not that God takes away the threat. I mean, they say, take away the snakes. And actually, God doesn't take away the snakes. God says, no, you need to confront the part. Well, you need to see accurately in your words, but I also think part of what that means is you need to confront the part of yourself that is seen inaccurately. You need to face it. And the healing is going to come through that. Um, and so, I mean, I've told this story in some context before, but it came to me so strong in relation to this passage. So some of my deep relationships over years have been with communities in the South Pacific that are facing relocation because of rising tides and also increasingly fierce storms. And one of the things that's very challenging for me as someone from the West who is insulated from a lot of these concerns, we have them here, but I have structures that help me mediate those things. Is the way in which there is fluidity about the question of God's agency in some of this stuff, and in relation to human culpability, and that's just hard for me. Though when I step back and I move it out of a kind of atomized framework, of course, many of these storms are the result of human culpability, just not this particular village. I mean, the result of nations across the ocean, across the sea, etc. One of the really powerful witnesses to me was of a pastor who had decided that his community was going to fast and pray in relation to the rising tides. And I assumed that I knew what his prayer was going to be. I assumed that he was praying something similar to the people of Israel. Take the storms away, make the water go backwards. Interestingly, that wasn't his prayer. His prayer was, no, our prayer when we fast and pray in relation to rising tides is, who is God and what is the purpose of our lives. In other words, this community, in response to the crisis, was asking, what are we not seeing, and how do we see more clearly? How do we better understand who God is in this situation, and how do we better understand what we're being called to? That was really humbling to me, because I don't know that communities on this side of the Pacific ask those questions nearly as deeply, or certainly with the kind of urgency that this community was. And yet when I read this biblical text, I feel like that's the kind of inquiry God is calling them to.
This
Reckon
makes
with
me,
who God is, and reckon with the purpose of this journey. What is it you've been called to?
that makes, for me, that sort of strengthens the connection that's already there with Isaiah 6, seraphim. I've always wanted to know what Isaiah meant when he said, I'm a person of unclean lips, and I dwell amongst the people of unclean lips. The idea being I think he's saying that I have spoken about God. Now that I've seen God high and lifted up, I have to confess that I have spoken about God in ways that were not accurate, and that the people I live among have also. It also, I always have fun when I teach that text with my students. The procedure then to cleanse Isaiah's lips is for this burner, the seraph, to take a coal from the altar and touch it to Isaiah's lips, burning the sin off. I imagine, which had to hurt, you know. And there's this, for me, there's this in that text. And now that I've put that together with what you've said and the text in front of us, there is a sense in which there's going to be some pain in coming to truth, I suppose, when you're so far from the truth, or so entrenched, or so ignorant. I don't know.
Yeah, Mark, it speaks to me a little bit about what hope might look like in the ambiguity of it. That the hope is not that God just takes away the destruction that we've done to the planet. That perhaps the hope is that we actually see it, and in seeing it, we face ourselves, and we face this God and God's call for us.
Which is going to be a call to change.
Call to change.
Change our behavior. Isaiah changed his speech. We would need to change our behavior.
I think the connection with Isaiah 6 is perceptive. And in the previous chapter, in chapter 5, verse 16 of Isaiah, the prophet says, the Lord of hosts is high in judgment. High in judgment. And in the passage in John, in which this is cited, when God says, when I'm lifted up, I will draw all things to myself. And Jesus is talking about judgment. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. In the context of Torah, God has already triumphed over Pharaoh, and the snakes being a reminder of that. And now God is executing judgment on God's own people for their failing, and offering them a way out. When I'm John 12:33, when I'm lifted up in judgment, I will draw all to myself. It's an image. It's the two faces of judgment and salvation, which I think it's very hard for Christians, for modern North American Protestant Christians, to hold those two things together.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I do think that climate, for a certain kind of population that is beginning to reckon with the seriousness of it, it actually is giving that kind of two faces of creation, that two faces of judgment and salvation, that theological depth. It can in certain communities. I feel like mean, you asked, Derek, what does this mean for our relationship with creation? I think for some communities, it means attending to the grief, attending to the loss, attending to the pain. I mean, to not look away, and to see in the looking, and in the pain of that looking, the sort of formative, well, reformation of a heart, and of a community.
There's what you just said reminded me, there's a film that was released a year or two ago called Don't Look Up, and it's about the climate.
Yeah.
It's an allegory
right.
for the climate crisis, but it's about a meteor coming to Earth that's going to destroy the Earth, and the media, sort of the parody of the right-wing media is just saying the answer is just don't look up.
Yeah,
If
That's
the,
right.
the whole idea that will,
that's right.
and this text is literally telling the people,
Look up.
look up.
That's right.
Look
What a
up
great
at
connection. That's right.
look up at the thing that's harming you, and look at the thing, look at the relationship between you and the thing that's harming you. I couldn't help but think about that.
And may
when you
I
said
add
that.
one other thing that I think is important
Please.
here? Look up and keep going forward. Because after this passage that we're talking about, which ends at verse 9, and everyone who gazes upon the copper snake will live. And then immediately, and the Israelites traveled on.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
it seems to me that anyone who is bitten is called to do three things: to consider God's judgment, to trust in God's power, as asserted against Pharaoh, but also to God's power to sustain in the wilderness, with this manna that they have despised,
Yeah.
and then to commit to keep going on this precarious journey.
Yeah, that's so good.
There's something, the anthropological kind of insight of this passage. I know we're sort of thinking about creation broader than the human, but I find that very compelling and relevant in relation to the climate crisis. This sort of sense of the length of the journey. They've just been sort of two losses of leaders, right? In the chapter before, Miriam and Aaron have passed, and it feels like you're taking steps backwards in terms of the geography, and it is precisely there where this simple food that is meant to be shared, not luxurious, it is meant to be enough for everyone, but also simple for everyone, becomes abhorrent. Like we can't do it anymore. And I think there's something very honest about the breakdown of will, and the discouragement that comes at this moment, that turns into shortness of temper. And I find it a deeply wise passage in terms of what do you do as a community when you're at that place in the fight, when you're at that place in the struggle. What kind of reorientation is required for health and for moving forward again?
And I'll just say that, I mean, I like what you're saying about the manna being the same for everyone, enough for everyone. That, of course, it's not that everyone gets exactly the same amount. They get what they need today. But I'm always struck by the rabbinic teaching that manna tastes like the thing everybody likes best. That there's,
That's lovely.
Your manna might be different from my manna. But there is some pleasure in it, which is, of course, exactly what they are missing when they say it's despicable. But, when you look at the description of it, it's a delicate thing. It's a delicacy.
Lovely.
I don't think I've heard that particular teaching before. I'm going to play with that idea a little bit. Jerusha, you said something that caught my attention and brought me back to verse 4. It says, from Mount Hor they set out by way to the Red Sea. Maybe this feeling and here these geographic markers. Maybe even a feeling of like we're going backwards, like we're not actually making progress, that they've come from the Red Sea, through the Red Sea, and they're going back to the Red Sea, or at least adjacent to the Red Sea. And how that often feels, in climate conversation, that often feels like we're back where we started, and maybe even somewhere worse.
Well, and even after, I mean, I also think it's interesting, just before this, they have a victory, and it kind of thinks, finally, we're going to move forward. And then, no, we're kind of going to go back again. And I mean, the geography is more symbolic than actual, right? But there is this sense of return, and not yet. We're still waiting. And there's, I mean, if there would be something that would take something, and Ellen, I think this is so wise that you said something actually pleasurable, something that is actually designed very carefully to your taste by a loving God, and to make me frustrated enough to say, oh, this every day, and to despise grace in that process.
Wow.
I mean, that feeling of meaninglessness, lack of direction, lack of trust, a loss of trust in God's character and provision, that might do it. And it's interesting to me how seriously God takes this. Normally when they complain against Moses. This time they complain against God and Moses. And there's like this, I mean, God's like, no, actually, this is, you got to get this. You got to get this. You've got to know, you've got to at least be able to see yourself and face the hardness that has come into your heart, or we aren't going to be able to do anything together.
Right.
And you can't really relate to this creation I've given you to relate to in this. Your hope will wither. Even the gift of manna, the miraculous gift, will seem loathsome to you.
As you're speaking about this, it's reminding me, I happen to be reading Numbers right now with my doctoral students, and in chapter 14, the God describes at length the death of everybody 20 years and older in the wilderness. And in no uncertain terms, your carcasses will drop in the wilderness. So you have to see yourself clearly, and maybe this part speaks to us. You have to see yourself clearly, and you have to get over yourself, because the future in the land is not yours. For your children. The children that you say they're just going to be war booty in the wilderness. No, I'm going to take them to the promised land. But you're going to die.
And you could say the reason for the circuitous route is we've got to kill time here, so to speak, until all these people die. We could go on, but what are we going to do when we get there? It's not, we can't enter yet because that generation has to pass away. That would be difficult, especially if you were in the pass away generation, to have. You're never going to have anything but manna the rest of your life. So there's nothing much to look forward to.
Hmm.
Must have been difficult.
So, taking all of these things that have been said into account, where is there a call to action here for the church?
I'll start with
Wow.
just a story about an art installation that an artist named Olafur Eliasson has done in various urban centers called Ice Watch. And he has taken sort of melting blocks of ice from glaciers in the Arctic Ocean that are currently melting. And he has moved them, these giant pieces and blocks of ice. You can look up this on Google and see the photos, to areas outside of art museums or in urban centers. And he asks people to watch them melt. So you come in and you can touch the ice, you can get close to the ice, you can see the ice melting on the floor, the ground. And of course, it has been melting this whole time. It's just now you have to see it. You have to get close to it. And I feel like that might be one of the calls to the church, is helping give our people courage and directing our vision to see the damage we have done. I think that's a huge, for preachers in particular, who are, are coming to think about this passage in relation to their preaching work in Lent. This passage opens up powerful opportunities to look at the pain of climate disaster. Why is it happening? And what would it mean to change, to be healed? How long do we have to look?
It's a striking thing. I believe this, the book of Numbers does not appear in the lectionary very often. I think it occurs 3 times. And so this occurs, this very challenging passage occurs in Lent, I think is really telling. So really, again, just summarize what we've said, I would say that the message is repent, which is to say, look at yourself, coram Deo, in the presence of God. Look to God's judgment, take that reality seriously, trust to God's victory, and move toward a future knowing that the future is not yours.
That last point is significant, very significant.
I'm reminded of for those who have been engaging with Creation Justice Ministries over the last year or so, reminded of my friend Talitha's book In Deep Waters, which is about spiritual conversations about climate change with young people. And we did a webinar together and we had a conversation about her book, and she talks a lot about how hope for the young people that she was working with at the time is not hope about things getting better. And this is a group of teenagers, and they're saying hope isn't about things getting better. Hope is about how do we care for each other in the midst of the disasters that are present and the disasters that are to come. And I just think of that in terms of this story of what is hope when the snakes are still biting you? What is hope when the ice caps are still melting, when the forests are still burning, when the tides are still rising? It's one, it's being clear-eyed about the fact that these things are happening. We have to we have to look up. And it's also, though, it's about I would imagine the helping other people look up helping the community to look up, being aware of those who are being bitten, being being attentive, being more attentive to those who are being bitten. And that hope isn't necessarily about us being on the other side, because to the point that's been made, we may not be around to see the other side of the climate crisis. Right now, it feels like the chances are good that we won't be around to see the other side of the climate crisis. But we have people to tend to, people who are being bitten in the midst of it that need to be attended to. And we need to care for them and help them and walk alongside them and accompany them.
I also, I would add something to that picture of hope, Ellen, and it's the point that you brought up about how they kept going. Something happened in this very disturbing story. These snakes and the looking to the bronze serpent, and that whatever healing happened there that allowed them to keep walking. And I wonder what kind of transformation happened in them as a people, what it is they learned, what it is they owned about themselves and about this God that allowed them in this challenging wilderness to say, no, we can keep going. Because I think maybe that was the danger of when your misperception is so off about the miracle and about that. The danger is that you just give up, you stop.
Yeah.
And there is something in this, even in the struggle, like there is a reorientation and a healing of your heart that is possible, that allows them to move forward. And wow, I mean, it's hard medicine, but it's the medicine of the cross too. I mean, when we look to the cross is not it's not magic. For all of our talk of healing of the cross and the power in the blood, it is also this meditation on our sin and our failings. And I mean, the great hope of the cross is that it might change our hearts. And I think there is something similar happening here, in allowing us then to move forward, move toward life.
I hadn't noticed it before, but I'm going to put in a plug for the people here behaving better than they might be otherwise thought to. Verse 6, the God sends the snakes and they bite people and they die. Verse 7, Moses does not chastise them. He does not suggest anything. There's no verbal message with the snakes. The snakes come, but immediately, then in verse 7, the people come and say, okay, we've sinned against you.
We messed that up.
Yeah, we have sinned. We got it. We understand. You get bit by a snake once and you'll get the message right now. We didn't, we messed up and we know it. And I think that's, I mean, I wouldn't make a whole big deal out of that, but that is not in character with them elsewhere in the wilderness wandering, that they so quickly recognize without being told what they've done wrong. That's perceptive in ways that surprise me of this murmuring people, how they behave elsewhere. Would that the church would be that quick to recognize why that we're being bit and why.
Two things come to my mind. One, in response to your comment, Derek, we may not see the other side of the climate crisis. There may not be in historical time another side, the other side, and in biblical time, there isn't in this world another side to the crisis. The Hebrew Bible ends again, the people in exile, and it ends, let us go up. That's the end of the book of Chronicles. let's try again to go up to the promised land. But the journey is always happening. And I think as I've been listening, I've been replaying in my mind a statement that Stanley Hauerwas made to me, probably goes back 7 or 8 years, to a discouraging political moment in this country. And he said, well, now at least we know what the church is for.
Ah,
Now
ah,
at least we know what the church is for.
ah.
And maybe that's something that we can help our students think about.
Mm,
It's not for our immediate benefit, perhaps, but it is for learning to help each other in a time that's likely to remain difficult.
mhm.
That feels like a good place to stop. This was a hard one, and I appreciate the wisdom and insight and fully engaging in the difficulty of this passage. And I hope that preachers will fully engage in the difficulty of this passage, because I feel like that's what the church needs. And if not in Lent, then when? So
Although Derek, I'll be honest with you, most of the preachers I know of are going to, if they take this text, they'll jump straight to John, might read this text in background, but won't exegete it or struggle with it at all. They'll go
Well-
straight to Jesus. Bet
Well,
you.
I think the invitation here is to hang out in the wilderness a little bit.
That's right. That is exactly right. That's exactly right.
I would
So
just
thank-
mention that David Stubbs' commentary on Numbers in the Brazos series, the Brazos Theological Commentary on the Bible, it's an excellent commentary. And he reckons with the Numbers text and its Christian interpretation, including in John, in very thoughtful ways.
Wonderful. Again, thank you all for this conversation, and appreciate all of the words of wisdom and insight that you brought to it.
It was an honor for me.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you for joining us for the Green Lectionary podcast. This episode was produced by Sprocket Wagner, and the music was provided by Christian McIver. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and help us spread the word with a good review. Leave us a comment and let us know how you use the show and how we can make it more useful for your ministry. You can learn more about this and other programs of Creation Justice Ministries at creationjustice.org.
Our story comes alive within these pages, for every time and place throughout the ages. God speaks and is heard, and the enduring word calls us to care for our world as we share the love that can set creation free. Restoring the earth to wholeness, peace, and harmony. Let the songs of the water, land, and sky resound, 'cause together we're all bound. Within these pages, there's always new life to be found.